Part 25. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 242. I'll help you. More than a year of changes have made his shoulders broader and stronger as a mermaid. Ciro leaned on his wet chest and curled her fingertips. Immediately afterwards, all the fish saw their leader pinching off the head and tail of the dead fish, cutting it in half, taking out the entire fish bones, and then dividing the lumpy fish into several small sashimi slices with sharp nails. All the mermaids. This was probably the most outrageous and exaggerated scene they had ever seen. That human being couldn't catch or eat fish, and everything he brought to his mouth had bones removed. They really don't understand the benefits of having such a cripple as a partner. Ciro watched the fish turn into sashimi in front of her eyes, and her empty stomach finally felt appetizing. She needed something to eat to keep her body healthy for the rest of the journey. When Lucid held the fish fillet and brought it to her mouth, she opened her mouth to eat out of habit. The tip of her pink tongue touched the pads of his fingers. Lucid retracted his nails to ensure that he would not really hurt her tongue. After she finished eating, he picked up a new piece and fed it to her. His expression was serious, and feeding the brand new Ciro was like doing a big thing to him. Ciro couldn't eat any more after eating half of it. She shook her head. "You can eat, I'm full." Roxid put down his hand and leaned on the back in his chest. He could clearly feel the bones wrapped under the thin skin. He frowned and asked, "During the year you disappeared, was the world not good to you?" Sierra burped and touched her belly. "It's fine, but I came here unexpectedly because I fell into a coma and was admitted to the hospital. When I went back, I happened to wake up from my coma. The body is not well taken care of." She looked back at him awkwardly. "It's what you see now, like flat green beans." Lucid didn't look around, just stared at her face, and then kissed her dry lips. "I'm glad the real you is back." Sierra felt that her legs were wrapped tightly, and those fish scales clung to her skin tightly, stained with her body temperature, and blended with her. "I'm sorry." She pressed her forehead against his smooth chest. "I lied." "It doesn't matter, I'll take you home right away. You won't see those dangers anymore." Moist breath filled her ears, whispering affectionately like an owner. If Rose Hill's imprisonment was a threat, then Lucid would definitely do it. Sierra didn't show any emotion on the surface, but also raised her head and kissed him. Roxd was always happy about her initiative, and he responded to her with great enthusiasm, as if he really didn't care about everything that had happened before, including false love, deception, and death. After a long time, Sierra curled up in his arms and panted, her lowered eyes a little helpless. The blackening value is not reduced at all. Do they all think that if they don't darken her, she will disappear? If this were the case, the probability of these values decreasing would be zero. It is estimated that her best efforts could only convince Roxid to stop the mermaids below from causing trouble to those passing ships. In the last few days of the sea voyage, all the fish knew that the leader's spouse was a cripple, and all the fish thrown on the small wooden board were dead fish. They had given up hope that she would be able to eat fish by herself, and watched numbly as Roxd carefully turned the dead fish into sashimi for her. The road to Sequoia Island is not easy and there are many reefs on the way. Ciro sat on the wooden board, looking at the black rocks scattered around and the mist at noon, and licked her chapped lips. There is no fresh water at sea, only a few sips when it rains. This is a dilemma that even Lucid cannot solve, and can only wait until he gets to the island. Along the way, mermaids emerged from the water one after another, staring at the human being who landed on the island. The green island with white sandy beach is getting closer. When Sierra's boatboard reached the shore, it was knocked a bit by the pebbles below. After several days of abuse, the board, which had been tied with water plants, couldn't withstand it and fell apart with a crash. The girl sitting on it also fell into the water. Soaked all over. Lucid swam to her side, transformed into a fishtail, came naked and carried her to the shore. Sierra glanced at his crotch, and smoothed her long skirt down to cover his beauty. Have you even forgotten how to wear clothes? Luxid walked a few steps in the sand, and after adjusting to his balance, he boldly carried her forward, not caring that his back was still exposed. He rubbed her neck affectionately. I haven't forgotten, but today is the first time in nearly a year that I have transformed into a hug to hug you. Without her, he had lost even the interest in changing. There was a ship that had been stranded for a long time on the shore of Saki Island. Lashid carried her up the rusty stairs, and Sira was dazzled by the jewelry and gold coins there. Luoxied put her down and said, "We will live here from now on." Sira stepped on the gold coin and looked back at him. "I'm not sure if I can adapt to the island climate." "You'll get used to it." He touched her face gently, then held it up and kissed her soft, dry lips again and again. "I miss you." Her lips were bitten and released by him from time to time. Sierra lowered his chest and said softly, "Okay, my throat is about to smoke." He picked up her fingers and kissed her again, causing her fingertips to feel numb. "I'll get it for you." Luoxied let go of her and whispered, "Wait for me here." Whether there is water on Saki Island depends on whether it has rained recently. As soon as Sira walked to a luxurious bed in the cabin, a monkey was holding a gold coin on the bed sheet and chewing on it. When he saw her, he jumped out of the round window with a hiss and ran very fast. She was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Luoxied came back soon with a teapot filled with water, filled a cup and handed it to her. Sira didn't care where he got the water from and moistened her dry throat, which brought her back to life completely. Luoxied watched her every move intently, always keeping a smile on his face. Sierra put down the cup and asked him, "Aren't you angry at all?" "I abandoned you." Luo-11 took her hand and put it on his chest. His heart was beating rapidly under the muscle layer. He smiled, "This mark will accompany me until death. It is also engraved on your soul." Sierra's wrist ached slightly, and time seemed to be pulled back to the scene when he bid her at the beach that day. "Do you regret it?" Sierra pressed his chest and raised her eyes and asked, "If you weren't so impulsive, maybe you would have found a new spouse this year." "No one is looking for a spouse, whether it's me or anyone else." Luoxied approached her and pushed her onto the big bed that no one had slept on for a long time, leaving her like a quail with no one to rely on, trapped in his arms. "I just want to ask you how much of your love for me comes from your heart." After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 243. Sira nodded, her lips a little white. "It looks like yes, we will cook it next time." Luoxied hugged her, feeling guilty. "I'm sorry. The first day she arrived, he screwed up." Sira looked at the bonfire in the distance and touched her comfortable belly. "I also want to eat some grilled fish." When Luoxied carried her back, there were no mermaids around the campfire, only the two of them and the stars in the night sky. One fish had been thrown into the bonfire and burned to charcoal, while the other intact Sira was taking small bites. After she was full and her stomach had calmed down, she wiped her mouth and turned around and said, "Luoxied, humans are not the rations you must eat, right?" Luoxied hesitated, "No." Sira leaned on his shoulder and spoke calmly, "It's because of me that I became like this." All the passing ships were buried in the mermaid's belly. His lack of answer was tantamount to admission. "This is true for 1 and 2, except for the werewolf." Sierra hooked her arm, "I owe you an answer on Christmas Day." Luoxied whispered, "Don't say it." She rested her chin on his shoulder and said calmly, "I have no intention of leaving again when I come back this time. I am the problem and I want to solve the problem." The sea breeze blew her hat, and Sierra quickly held it down, took it off and put it on her lap. "Do you remember the store where I bought you gummy candies?" Luoxied lowered his eyes, "Remember?" Sierra said softly, that store was closed due to the war, and the owner is missing. I can't eat gummy candies. He may be on the run, or he may be on a ship heading to the capital. There must be many people like him. What the outcome will be is self-evident. She hooked his arm and said, if it's not a bad person, we can't do anything too cruel. Luo Xie turned to look at her and remained silent. Sira kissed him on the lips and was not in a hurry to ask him to take any action. She leaned against him quietly, played with the soft sand with her feet for a while, and poked his arm. Let's go, it's too cold here. In bed late at night, Sierra had a fever. The unfamiliar island climate crushed her body, which had just recovered from a serious illness, so easily that she was not even surprised. Luxid, who was sleeping lightly next to her, was keenly aware of her abnormal body temperature and entangled his lips with hers. The effect of the treatment took effect quickly and suppressed the high fever. When she got up the next day, Sierra was still quite energetic, but she knew her body best, and the problem of acclimatization could not be solved in 1 or 2 strokes. Lawside's kiss is like a medicine prescribed by a doctor. It can be used as soon as you kiss it, and the medicine's effect has a time limit. She stood in the sun, and from a distance she saw a mermaid wearing trousers and a bare upper body, climbing up a very tall coconut tree and cracking coconuts for her. Sierra was stunned for a moment, then ran over with her skirt in hand. Looking up close, Luo Xied's silver hair was rippling in the air, and then he stepped on a coconut branch more than 20 meters high and jumped down, splashing a piece of fine sand. Drink this. He easily used his nails to peel off the outer layer of the coconut, poked a hole in the smoother surface inside, and handed it to her. Seeing the sweat on his forehead, Sierra bent her arm and wiped it with her sleeve. Thank you. Luo Xied kissed her on the forehead. I'm trying to think of a way to get you used to this place, can you give me some more time? It is not difficult to hear that his tone is pleading. Sierra felt sour in her heart, hugging the coconut and rubbing his ears. Okay. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 244. Sierra took the initiative to hug that slender neck and pressed her cheek against his. Most of the time it was a lie at the beginning, but the longer I spend time with you, the more inseparable my feelings will be. Many times I hypnotized myself and everything I did with you was fake, Sierra said softly, but you split your legs for me, learned to be a human being, and stood in front of me without hesitation when I was in danger. He would also stand up for me. After many things happened, I realized that my love was true, no matter how I tried to warn myself. I'm sorry for making you sad. She lowered her eyes, her soft voice sincere. Luxid slowly knelt down in front of her, buried his head in her dry golden hair, and smelled the familiar smell on her body. Well, I'm really sad. Sierra stroked his long, smooth hair, stroking it again and again, imitating how to coax a child. It's not sad. Luo Xied curled his lips, thinking that he would not take her to the deep sea for the time being. Not knowing anything about his psychological activities, Sarah was exhausted physically and mentally from several days of sailing. She pulled off the gorgeous cover on the bed, buried herself in the soft goose down quilt, and said softly, I want to take a rest, I'm so tired. Luo Xied touched her face and said, I'll accompany you. He had never slept on the bed here, and Sira's arrival made everything different. He lifted up the other corner of the quilt and got in next to her. I will get warm soon. Sira did not refuse. The winter climate on the island made her uncomfortable. She leaned against his chest and closed her eyes, letting his arms wrap around her. But within a few minutes, she felt something strange. When she understood what was going on, the tips of her ears turned red. Lawside, I'm very tired. I know, but it's out of control. The mermaid kissed the back of her neck. Without the tail, it can't hide. Sierra sighed softly. Okay, but you are not allowed to do anything, do you understand? After receiving his assurance, Sierra couldn't control his tiredness and closed his eyes and fell asleep. As promised, Loosiad didn't do anything, didn't even move, he just held her and kissed her hair from time to time. At the entrance of the rusty stairs, Terry stood by the door with human legs. Beside him stood a female mermaid with a bent tail that was a section shorter than him. She looked at the two people clinging to each other on the bed inside, and murmured softly, "That woman is not the girl buried in the cemetery. This girl looks much more mature. Has Luxid fallen in love with her?" Terry watched quietly, and after a while he said, "Probably not. He has used his life contract and cannot fall in love with anyone else again." "Then who is she? Is it worth crossing the ocean to snatch her from the vampire?" "Terry, the only one who can compete with vampires is Syrah." He probably knew the answer, but he didn't explain it. The female mermaid didn't say anything, she just asked, "You haven't heard from Zachary yet? He won't never come back, right?" Terry frowned. He followed a human to the capital, and his love didn't want to return to the island with him. The lifestyles of humans and mermaids are never the same. He couldn't help but look at the girl sleeping on the bed. She looks thin and thin, with no resistance at all. Can she really survive here? When Sierra woke up, it was dark outside and there was no one around her. She lifted up the quilt and stood up, rummaging through a pile of jewelry to find a few long skirts and cloaks that could keep out the cold. She opened the door and went out. The sea breeze blowing at the top of the stairs stung her head. She frowned and took a step back, turned over a lady's hat and put it on before heading down to the sand top heavy in the cold wind. Loosiad made a fire in a dry sandy area, with two fish strung on it with branches. There were several mermaids of different colors lying beside him, each holding their chins and watching his strange operations. Their upper bodies were only covered with shells to cover key parts, and their giant tail fins flapped against the beach from time to time. It was quite fun for Syrah to watch this scene. She walked over and saw a female mermaid puffing out her chest and curling her tail, looking at her quietly. They had not been with the strongest first pair for countless summers, and they were dissatisfied with this new fragile human being. Syrah couldn't understand that series of mermaid language. "I heard that she is a cripple and can't even catch fish." "Luxide, why do you fall in love with her? Compared to the human you buried last time, this one looks equally weak. Do you like incompetent spouses? Or do you have a soft spot for such humans?" Loosiad set up the grilled fish and replied in the mermaid language, "I am hers." Immediately, he ran to the top-heavy girl and picked her up. "Are you up?" "I grilled the fish." Sierra smiled and rubbed her belly. The wind blew just now. Not only did she have a headache, but her stomach also hurt now. She refrained from showing any signs of it and sat on the tree stump in front of the fire. The fragrant grilled fish was handed over by Lucid. The deep-sea fish does not require any seasoning. It will be fragrant and ready to eat after both sides are golden. Under the gaze of several pairs of eyes, Sierra opened her mouth and took a bite. "Is it just for me? They won't eat it?" "They don't eat cooked food." Lizzie stood next to her and helped her block most of the wind. "Suddenly I thought of those ships that were swallowed up while sailing on the sea." Syrah looked at the alluring mermaids, and felt a chill in her back. She turned around and said, "I heard that the sea area is very unsafe now. Are you cannibals?" This topic was very off-putting, but according to the ferocious nature of mermaids, she felt it was true. Loosiad was silent for a moment, and there was a flash of panic and confusion in his lake blue eyes. He tightened his jaw and said, "I didn't." But he didn't, and Syrah read him. She ate the grilled fish in silence, not knowing how to solve this problem, but the discomfort in her stomach worsened. Her face turned a little pale. "Well, that's fine if you don't." Are you angry? Luozide turned his face and leaned towards her cautiously. The next second, Sira put the branch with the fish back into his hand, picked up her skirt and ran into the woods behind. Don't follow, come. Luoxide's face darkened, he threw the fish into the fire, stood up and followed. Although it was embarrassing, the feeling of causing Sierra's physical collapse was even more desperate. Like a primitive person, she pulled soft grass blades to solve an inevitable need for gastrointestinal motility. Luoxide didn't dare to get too close and quickly realized what happened. Sierra's spleen and stomach could only drink mineral water and filtered water in the real world. She knew what was happening to her and was even more ashamed. After a while, she walked out of the grass with weak legs. Luoxide was waiting for her behind a coconut tree, looking guilty. The water here is not clean. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Shire. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 245. The coconut water on the island was delicious and sweet. She drank half of it while sitting on the comfortable beach heated by the sun. Terry, carrying branches, jumped out from the bushes behind him. He walked to the place where the fire had been burned before, set up branches, and placed a large copper pot filled with water on it. Sierra immediately understood that this meant boiling water for her to drink. Terry met her gaze, thought for a moment and said, "You're not fit to live here." Sierra pursed her lower lip. "How will you know if you don't try?" He said bluntly. "Zachary's favorite spouse refused to come here." "Khalida," Sierra smiled, "of course she won't come here. She has the most luxurious life and the most fulfilling life. Zachary will be very happy with her." Terry nodded. "I hope, since the war, we have lost contact with him on land." Sierra looked back and said, "He will be fine." "Where is Lucid?" Terry, "The lavatory on the stranded ship was rusty and he was cleaning it. The only ones who can split their legs are him, Zachary, and Roxt, and now he is the only one cleaning the bathroom." Sierra opened her lips. "Then I'll go see if I can help." She got up and walked along the seashore towards the moss-covered cruise ship, and was soon blocked by a beautiful mermaid. The other person communicated with her in broken English, which he had obviously learned overnight. "I heard you can't catch fish." Seeing that she needed to look up to him, Sierra squatted down and stretched out her hand. Her nails were round and not sharp at all. "I can't." "Then you can sing." Sierra thought for a while and shook her head. "No, but I know you sing very well." "Then what do you know?" The mermaid's eyes looked more or less disgusting. Sierra thought about it carefully. "None of the things I know can be displayed here." "Okay, then you want to play water polo with us?" "This is the easiest." The mermaid turned sideways, and moved her big green tail a little away, revealing a hollow ball carved from wood. Sierra glanced at the undulating ocean and the wet heads exposed, and suddenly understood something. They seemed to want someone to recognize her ability to survive here and become the spouse of Rawside. After all, she had acted too weak all the way and did not meet their standards for mate selection. "Well, it's a challenge though." "But..." Sierra threw away the hat on her head, unbuckled the belt around her waist, and pulled down the layers of skirts one by one until she was left with thigh-length lining pants and a bra. The sea breeze made her excited. She rubbed her arms and stepped into the shoal where the sea water came up. Her voice trembled. "Come." Terry lit the wood and adjusted the position of the copper kettle. When he turned around, he saw clothes scattered on the beach not far away. With a serious look on his face, he immediately looked toward the ocean, and soon found Sierra among the colorful tails. She is much smaller than her peers. She is holding a wooden ball in her hand and bobbing in the water. After getting familiar with the rules, Sarah threw the ball out for the first time, and the fast mermaid picked it up with its tail swung. The ball kept flying around in the air. Sierra, who had adapted to the cold water temperature, trembled at first, then later diverted her attention and played with a group of mermaids. It was quite interesting. If you forget about their beautiful appearance and cannibalism, behavior will be better. The mermaids were good at using their tails to control the force to knock the ball away. Every time it was Syrah's turn to grab the ball, she could never catch up with their speed. Terry hurried back to the ship and told Lockheed, who was still concentrating on cleaning the sink. Scylla is playing water polo with them. Well, I think you should go and take a look. She is so weak that there is no way she can win. Logoside paused, threw down the towel, and quickly dodged out. Sierra finally touched the ball that was just thrown in front of her on the water. A fishtail swept over from the bottom of the water in front of her, causing huge waves. The current pushed her away in an instant, and she crashed into a cold and wide embrace. Logosied hugged her waist in time, feeling the temperature of her body that was almost integrated with the sea water, and frowned, "It's so cold, why did you go into the water?" Sierra stepped on his tail and pointed at the ball floating away. "My ball." The beautiful hollow wooden ball was successfully intercepted by a mermaid, and then knocked out of his hand. Sierra slapped the water hard and turned around in annoyance, her blonde hair inevitably sticking to his smooth chest. "Come on, I never won once." Logosied looked at her fighting eyes and understood, "Do you like to play that?" Sarah looked at the ball that was getting farther and farther away, turned around and pressed his shoulder, and an idea came to his mind. "Lockheed, let me cheat. Let's get it back." Luz objected, "You will catch a cold. Your skin cannot withstand the temperature of this climate." Sierra kicked his slippery black tail, floated up, and kissed his moist lips resoundingly. "You will cure me before I catch a cold. Let's go, let's go." Being beaten to the point of being helpless, just this once. Luxid hugged her tightly and swung his tail under the water, causing a ripple and brushing against her thigh from time to time. Her skin was itching in the water as the greasy scales rubbed against her. Sierra subconsciously lifted her legs and wrapped them around his waist. She put one arm around his neck and pointed to the balls that were being slapped further and further away by those beautiful tails. "Superior." As soon as the damn desire for victory came out, her words were like commanding a mount. Rockside held her hips, swung his tail violently, splitting the sea water like Li Xian's arrow, and rushed out in an instant. The sea water instantly covered Syrah's head, but she had already adapted to Rock's swimming speed. Her wet eyes opened in the water, staring closely at the ball that had just been knocked out of the water. Logosied's speed was very fast, which had a lot to do with his muscular black fish tail. He spent almost no effort and just used his tail to open a way out, throwing away the surrounding mermaids who were grabbing the ball, allowing Selena to stretch. "You can hold the ball with your hands and take it for yourself. Win easily." On the sea, her legs rode on Logosied's shoulders and broke out of the water. She held the ball in her arms and raised it with a smile. "Scylla, you are cheating." The mermaid spoke to her in broken English. "Sorry, I'll just cheat this time." Sierra threw the ball and let them continue playing with a smile. Logosied held her thigh in his hand and looked up at her. "They are the best at this. It's normal that you can't play with them without a tail." Sierra sat astride his shoulders, held his head and asked, "Have you played this game with them before?" "Don't play." Logosied slowed down and slowly carried her back to the shallows. He first gave her a long kiss to make sure she wouldn't catch a cold, and then said, "My intervention will only make the game worse." Boring, just like that. Sierra smiled and said, "You are so awesome." The directions of the first two are reversed, and this chapter is too shallow. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 246. The bathroom in the cabin was cleaned, and Terry poured the boiled hot water into the bathtub and flushed the fresh water to a similar temperature. Sierra took her first hot bath since arriving on the island, and there was even rose essential oil available that had been gathering dust for a long time. She spent the day comfortably. At the end of the evening, Lucid returned to the bedroom with grilled fish and found that Sierra had not woken up after taking a nap. He walked over with the plate and called her softly, "Get up and eat, Sierra." Sierra opened her eyes drowsily and muttered, "Yeah." She had a splitting headache and wanted to sit up, but Lucid noticed that her cheeks were abnormally rosy. He put down the plate and held her face up, his tone suddenly darkened, "You have a fever again." "Well, probably." Sierra half closed her eyes, touched her face, put her arms around his neck and pressed her body against him. "Maybe she got cold while playing in the water during the day." "Impossible." Lucid stepped back a little, pinched her lips to open them, and kissed her deeply. A kiss that does not contain any love, only pity and discomfort. "Remember, we just kissed after the game." He leaned against her forehead and said in a deep voice, "You have been sick repeatedly since you came to the island." Sierra also knew that she was like a ball of mud at the moment, and even her bones ached. She lay back on the quilt, knowing the reason in her heart, "Maybe my body is not used to it yet. It has not been well since it fell into the sea while traveling." She didn't say it was acclimatization, but Lucid heard another meaning from it. He lowered his eyes, and his face was gloomy. "You can't get enough nutrition here." He is very smart and has understood that humans and mermaids receive different nutrients from the same species. Different living environment, different food, she will only gradually weaken. All the good things I had imagined before were shattered. He originally thought they would live happily here. An unspeakable anxiety enveloped Lucid's body. Sierra, who felt better, held his face and said, "Hey, I'm just not used to it, okay? I'll be fine." Lucid looked at her for a few seconds, then calmed down. "Would you like some fish?" Of course. Sierra nodded with a smile. After eating a whole clean sea fish, even the bones of which were grilled crispy, and a glass of hot water, Sierra wandered around the cabin after eating and drinking, and then went back to bed to sleep. Terry came to see the leader and guessed what was going on. The two stood together on the huge deck on the top of the ship, which was covered with moss. Lucid lowered his eyes and looked at the reflection of the bright moon in the sea water below. "Sella is getting sick repeatedly." Terry asked, "Is this Sierra the one buried in the forest?" "Her soul has changed into a body." He said quietly, "There won't be a second person." Terry understood, and then said, "I have read in Wally's library that Sierra has never lived on an island. This place is too different from her living environment. If she is not acclimatized, she will only get sick cyclically." Lucid grasped the rusty railing tightly and broke a section with a little force, leaving red rust stains on his hands. "The vampires on the shore are watching. And land is the place where they can least exert their abilities." Terry looked at him. "Then what are your plans? Sacrifice Sierra's health and keep her here to slowly adapt, or follow his spouse like Zachary?" Lucid lowered his eyes and said nothing. Zachary didn't have that much trouble. Terry realized the problem belatedly. He raised his hand and thought, "Maybe, you should let Sierra make a choice. Go back to land and let her choose. No one is willing to hurt her anyway, right? If she loves you, she will come back to you." As soon as Sierra woke up, she was greeted with a lingering good morning kiss. She rubbed her eyes and said, "Good morning." Lucid rolled over and pressed her down, tightening her waist. The quilt on her body slipped from her back to her waist. He leaned down and licked her neck carefully. With this abnormal enthusiasm, Sierra blushed. "What's wrong? How about I take you back?" He bit the flesh on her shoulder gently, then sucked on it, leaving red marks. Sierra was stunned for a moment. Why so sudden? Lucid raised his eyes and said, "You owe us a choice, don't you? I think you should continue to fulfill it." There was a sudden chill on her wrist. Sierra lowered her head and saw the fish scale bracelet on her wrist. She was surprised. "It's still there." Lucid smiled, his eyes lit up with stars. "I knew your soul was gone the day you died." I took off this bracelet because I wanted to wait for you to come back and put it on for you again. Are you really not leaving? You won't be leaving. He lowered his head and asked softly. The system brought my body and soul together. Sierra touched his face. You can feel it, right? I don't plan to leave. She didn't think she had the courage to sneak away again. I want to create a home for you on land that belongs to us. You can have a big fish pond, or you can put me in it as a decoration, you know, just like Zachary. Loid looked at her. If you like that. Sierra said softly, but now there are wars everywhere. There was a slight lump in his throat, and he whispered, I won't let them rob passing ships. Sierra rubbed his face, surprised that she could get him to commit so quickly. Although the blackening value remains intact. Rockside's mobility was very strong, and at dusk, the mermaids gathered back. They will continue to live in the sea without affecting humans. If someone deliberately messes with them, that same human can also serve as a delicious meal. In the evening, Sierra, who couldn't get out of the house because of a stomachache, was helped to bed by Lucid. She thought it was quite funny. I feel like I will die if I lose you now. Lucid touched her pale face, but before she could say anything, the bedroom door was knocked open. Terry stood at the door with an incomprehensible expression. Zachary is back with the ship. Sierra got dressed and ran out. She could already see a small dot of light on the shoreline. She was surprised. Did Khalida come back with him? Terry, without a doubt. How can it be? This was the first question that Sierra thought about. Khalida should know her delicate body better than she does. What is she doing here? Khalida stood on the deck, staring at the island getting closer and closer to her. Zachary stood behind her. You're going to love it here. Khalida tugged at the corners of her lips. I'm a little hungry, can you get me some cookies? When Zachary turned around and left, she immediately bent down and took out the fireworks surrounded by a pile of spices from the barrel next to her. She expressionlessly took out the lighter and lit the wire. Lucid put Sierra's hat on her head and said, I'll go take a look. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 247. Are they the only two on the boat? She couldn't help but ask. Terry, just the two of them. As he finished speaking, a bunch of fireworks soared into the sky and exploded in the sky from the approaching ship on the opposite side. Sierra's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw the brilliant fireworks lighting up a small area of the sky. Are they signaling the ships outside? Is there a lost ship outside the island? She reacted instantly. And the fireworks that bloomed one after another in the distance startled all the mermaids under the sea. There was violence in Lucid's eyes and his voice was cold. They betrayed the tribe. How could this happen? Sierra was shocked. I don't understand. Zachary is also on that ship, right? Aren't they together? Go back and wear something thicker. Lucid pushed her away. I'll ask Terry to send you away now. What? Let's go now. Sierra grabbed his arm. It's already very late now. I'm with you. A mermaid emerged from the water and shouted sharply at him, Chief, a ship is coming. Lucid calmly issued the order, gather them into shallow water and stay away from the island. Sierra's pupils shrank and she guessed that Khalida deliberately set off fireworks to guide the following ships. But why did she do this? Zachary didn't understand the same problem. He wanted to stop the fireworks, but Khalida put a dagger against his white neck. Why? In the fireworks, his questions and screams were unreal, his expression was painful, and the excitement of going home was shattered at this moment. It wasn't until the fireworks were set off that Khalida slowly put down her dagger, looked at Zachary who was gradually turning into a mermaid, and said calmly, After the war broke out, my mother called me and asked me to rush to the capital as soon as possible to meet him outside. Meet her on vacation, remember? Zachary was confused for a moment, he didn't care about anything but her. Khalida raised her lips and sneered, but she died when we arrived. She was attacked by a group of mermaids on the ship heading to the capital. When the body was dragged ashore, the people from the Ocean Academy told me that only half of my body was left. My father didn't tell me the truth until he couldn't hide it anymore. She loves me the most. Khalida lowered her head and murmured to herself, give me the best love and life, and I should have a happy family. After the fireworks were set off, she knew that people outside the fog would be able to discern the direction. She threw the dagger hard on the oak floor and roared at him and the ocean over there, but because of you sirens, she died. What's funny is that I, like Syrah, believed you were innocent, haha. She sneered and looked at the island that was getting closer and closer. You made mistakes and you have to pay the price. Several ships loaded with cannons broke through the fog, and countless soldiers pointed their guns at the sea. The leaders were the teachers and professors of the Ocean Academy who were observing the mermaids. Once the mermaid tries to show its head and approaches, the bullet will be fired without hesitation. Don't kill them, leave them alive for research, several people in uniform shouted. They were all from the academy. They had heard about the appearance of mermaids in Wali early on, but unfortunately they were all stopped by Miss Khalida. Now she has introduced them to this paradise, which is really an unexpected surprise. Artillery fire bombarded from the ships on the sea. Lashid took Syrah and ran behind the woods, while saying to Terry, you go and prepare the ship. There were several unused escape boats hanging on the stranded cruise ship. Terry easily lifted the boat off, walked through the dense woods on the island to the other end, and put the boat into the water. Things were so sudden that Syrah didn't know what to do, and this change made her brain confused. In a world without plot and heroine, everything becomes uncontrollable. Rockside lifted her up under her arm and put her into the boat. He looked solemn and said, let Terry take you away. This matter was no longer something she could interfere with. Why did Khalida do this? Syrah didn't understand, but she also knew that she was a big trouble that distracted him. She frowned and said, if possible, you can come to land and tell me what happened to Khalida and Zachary. Luosyed squeezed her hand, a hint of warmth appeared on his serious face. Tell you what happened to them? Are you worried that I won't come to you? Sierra nodded honestly, don't get hurt. I can't help you. I can only care about you so much. She has a clear understanding of her abilities. Luosyed couldn't help but chuckle, don't worry, nothing will happen to us. When I return to land, I will make you a beautiful garden, a huge fish pond, and then I will stay in it. Come on, Syrah. The flames ignited the trees on the island. Sierra was pushed out of the escape boat while Terry tied one end of the rope to himself and pulled the boat away from the shore. Sierra saw him standing by the beach for a while, then ran into the woods and lost track of him. She held down her hat that was about to blow away in the wind and watched the fire on the island soar into the sky and illuminate half of the sky. The beautiful songs of the mermaids came from all directions, and there was murderous intent everywhere. She didn't know why, but she was sure that it would be those ships that suffered. They destroyed the only home the mermaids relied on for survival, and they would also bear their wrath. Terry took her ship forward for 3 days without rest, and finally approached an unfamiliar port. There had been no fresh water at sea for 3 days, and Sierra was in urgent need of some water. Her lips were chapped, and her dry body was even more fragile. Isn't it almost Wally? I can still hold on, she whispered. No, you have to replenish some nutrition. Your body is weaker than before. Terry was a little disgusted. Sierra was also quite helpless. I also hope that I can gain weight. However, the broken system didn't give her a chance at all. The boat gradually approached the shore, but Terry's dorsal fin stood up hard. His eyes under the mucous membrane moved slightly and he stared nervously ahead. It's no coincidence that the area we arrived in belongs to werewolves. Sierra was stunned for a moment, then stood up unsteadily and said in a voice that was about to smoke, "That should be safe." She heard that werewolves only provoke racial antagonism and hunt disobedient vampire newborns without harming innocent people. Their sense of morality is the strongest and closest to humans. "But I can't go up." Terry swung his fishtail and turned around. "I don't trust you alone." Sierra used the map on the system to explore the locations of Rose Hill and Eric. "It's quite a coincidence that one is in the capital and the other is here." "It doesn't matter," Sierra said, "I have a friend here." "Werewolf friend?" Teely reacted quickly and was subconsciously vigilant. "Are you going to go with them?" "The leader asked me to take you back to Wally, where you will be reunited." "Because I am currently dual-edited, the subject matter of this book is relatively general. I just don't have much money and don't want to write more. I think the update is slow and can be done with it. For now, I just fill in the small holes and get to the ending. The main text will definitely be finished in November, and there won't be much content left. The follow-up extras will probably be about 100,000 words. The full text will end between 600,000 and 700,000 words. Carrot carrot. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 248. Sierra stepped ashore with her skirt in hand, turned around and said, "The dreams between us are connected, Luosied will find me." She paused and then said, "Wait for me for an hour. If I don't come back within an hour, you can rush back to the island to see how your companions are doing. They need your help even more." Terry stared at her for a while, then the fish's tail flapped on the water and turned in an arc. "I'll wait for you. If you don't come when the time is up, I will come find you." Not long after Sarah walked out of the deserted port, she realized something was wrong and quickly stood against the wall. "This place is actually full of black people from St. Warren. Already overrun by St. Warren. The different skin color makes her dazzling white skin and blonde hair so eye-catching. What is Eric doing here?" She looked at the bright dots on the map, not far from herself. She pursed her lips, but before she could figure out the reason, her wrist tightened and she was staggered into a house and covered her mouth. She opened her eyes wide and found that the other person had the same skin color as hers, and her violently beating heart suddenly calmed down. The man was wearing civilian clothes and holding a gun in one hand. After seeing her calm down, he slowly let go of her. "How come you, a girl, are here? You were enslaved by them and escaped during the chaos." Sierra nodded. Seeing her pale face and chapped lips, the man felt pity and pushed her. "We have to take back the territory and go to the back. Bullets don't have eyes." The room was full of people who were preparing for the battle like him. Sierra silently found a corner and squatted against the wall, very sensible. Suddenly a gunshot rang out from somewhere outside, and the people hiding in the house immediately kicked open the door and ran out. Terry, who was submerged in the water, heard the movement on the shore, untied the rope tied to his body and climbed onto the shore. His fishtail transformed into a pair of legs and stepped on the ground. Sierra's breath was very faint among the gunfire. Terry sniffed it carefully, followed the smell, casually took off the clothes of a corpse and tied them to his crotch. Eric kicked away the enemies around him, and his keen sense of smell detected something coming ashore. "Keep the prisoners in exchange for our men." He said something hastily and ran towards the direction where the smell came from. When Terry found Sierra, she was sitting on a bench in the house, not looking at all panicked. "It's not safe here. You have to come with me." He stepped forward and grabbed her arm, pulling her up. Sierra looked outside the door, and saw the tall figure in military uniform coming quickly. Terry protected the person behind him with a wary look on his face. "Is it your old friend Eric?" Sierra tilted her head and licked her dry and stinging lips. "Well, he must not recognize me now." Don't expose my identity first. You just need to deliver me to him and be led by his team. I go home. She thought of a countermeasure at this moment. In fact, being 100% black and saving the world can be divided into two things. Her answer can only be given to one person and cannot satisfy three at the same time. Doesn't it mean that no matter how she chooses, it will be an irreparable loss for the other two people, and it can only clear one person's blackness value to zero? But saving the world is different. She just needs to convince them not to interfere with the normal operation of the world. Looking at it this way, it seems clear. If you don't want to go home again, the chance to make another choice becomes dispensable. The only thing that troubled her was the mark left by Rawside on her body. That is indelible. Terry frowned. You have to give up, Lizzie-eyed, and run into the arms of that stinking wolf. Syrah shook her head. I'm just here to solve the problem. Eric and Rosehill have to sit down and talk. These two people have to solve the racial problem and the disobedient new vampires. This has nothing to do with the command object given to me by Logos, yet Terry didn't accept it very well. Sierra looked up at him. Of course, but I have to stop the situation from deteriorating. Too many people have died, Terry. It shouldn't be like this. She added, just like Khalida bombing the island, I don't believe she would do it for no reason. Maybe the mermaid hurt her, and this kind of thing can't happen again. The feeling of being forcibly pulled back to be a virgin was even more uncomfortable than being a Neptune. What she endured was no longer just emotion. Terry saw the determination in her eyes, and his mind began to waver. When Eric came to the door, a bullet grazed his face, leaving a bloody mark that healed quickly when he stepped into the door. Syrah watched him quietly from behind the mermaid. He has changed a lot in the year since he left. His black hair is now braided, and it is tied back very short. His resolute face has become more three-dimensional and deep. His clear and innocent eyes have also disappeared, replaced by a fierce look. Violent and wild. That military uniform looked like he was commanding an army. He has completely grown up and grown into a person who can control a party. Sierra marveled at this change and gently pulled Terry's sleeve, hoping to get him to cooperate. When Eric's eyes met hers, she lowered her head first. Are you protecting her? After discovering this, Eric became less aggressive. Terry hesitated for a while, then nodded, yeah. The two looked at each other for a long time, and Eric didn't want to waste his time on a harmless mermaid. Terry pulled the girl behind him out and exited. She is dying of thirst following me. Find her some water. Sierra staggered to stand in front of Eric, looking up at him with an unfamiliar face. The girl's skin was pale and her body was so thin that she looked malnourished. Eric frowned and glanced at Terry again, who had already taken 2 steps back and rolled out of the window. Eric felt troubled when he was suddenly stuffed with someone, and said in an indifferent voice, "It seems he has abandoned you." Sierra nodded and swallowed. The dry pain made her uncomfortable. "Well, I'm dying of thirst." Her voice was hoarse and unpleasant, and Eric was silent. "Stay here for now. After the war is over, follow the team. I will take you to a safe village nearby." "Thank you," Sierra nodded. Eric stopped looking at her and turned around to go out. Sierra found a corner to sit down again. Within 2 minutes, a kettle was thrown in outside the door. She walked over, picked it up and whispered, "Thank you." Eric frowned and closed the door. There was a strong fishy smell inside, which made his nose very uncomfortable. He thought that the kettle could no longer be taken back and used. Sierra opened the lid and took a few sips of water, instantly feeling relieved. She licked her stinging lips and began to guess about Eric. While killing vampires, he becomes a general in times of crisis for the kingdom and goes out to kill the enemy. Wally hasn't given up since he entered the military camp, and he has climbed so high. Syrah bent her knees and rested her chin on it, slightly in trance. In comparison, he seems to be the one who is least affected by her. He has not turned evil and killed humans, and he still knows how to protect his home. So good. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 249. Sierra waited in the house for a long time. It was almost dark outside, and she didn't see him coming back. There was only the light swaying through the crack in the door and the sound of heavy objects being dragged. Eric ordered his subordinates to clean up the corpses left on the street and burn them, then he remembered that there was a girl he had left behind in a house. Repair the place and make a fire to cook. The strong smell of blood here may attract vampires in the middle of the night, so be careful. He pushed open the forgotten door. The fishy smell faded a lot, but there was still a lingering in the room. This makes Eric subconsciously wary and repulsive. His eyes immediately spotted Sierra in the darkness. She got sleepy after waiting in the back, squatted in the corner and fell asleep with her knees in her arms. She was a very thin and pitiful one. I didn't even notice anyone coming in. Eric took a few steps inside and found that the lingering fishy smell came from the girl. He stopped suddenly, unwilling to get closer. Perhaps it was because the mermaid had mated with her during the day that it left such heavy marks that lasted for a long time. Eric thought so, and an inexplicable memory suddenly came out. That mermaid. It seems that he once appeared in Wally and found a human spouse. But what's the point of putting her in such a dangerous place? He frowned, stopped walking back to the door, and finally raised his hand to knock on the door. Not wanting to think too much about things that had nothing to do with him, Eric looked at the sleeping girl and his shoulders trembled in shock. Sierra turned her head. Under the hazy light, the tall and strong man had turned around, and a calm voice reached her ears, "Get up and go out to eat. I will take you to the nearest safe village tomorrow morning." Sierra said thank you, stood up with her hands on the wall, and slowly moved out. She is indeed showing signs of collapse in this body. She has eaten sea fish for so many days and often suffers from stomach upset. She has almost no strength. There were white-skinned soldiers walking around outside, and it was not surprising to see a woman here. How they treated the black slaves and how they handled them, St. Warren soldiers will treat them in this captured area. Fair enough. There are many wizened women like her who look like they have been abused. The dull hair, thin body, and dirt on her face almost obscured all of Sierra's brilliance. She looked around calmly, then found the circle of civilians who had similar outfits to her own, and walked slowly over. When the other party saw that her skirt was made of high-end material but her body was sloppy, he kindly squeezed a seat for her and gave her 2 freshly roasted sweet potatoes. An older woman, seeing how sick she was at such a young age, unconsciously felt pity for her. "Which family are you, a young lady in distress? They put on a beautiful dress and you are so hungry." Sierra had eaten no more land-based food than seafood in days. The sweet potato was sweet and soft, and she didn't care about being hot. She took a big bite, and a burst of hot air came out of her mouth. She took a few mouthfuls of cold air before eating it. Her empty stomach felt much better, and she had the strength to speak. "It's from Leicestershire." "Then it's really far to get here," the other party sighed and handed her another cup of boiling hot water. "Now that we are saved, we can go to the nearest village to settle down tomorrow and find a way to contact our family." "Thank you." Sierra hugged the cup and warmed the fire, feeling comfortable all over for a moment. During this period, Eric walked past her several times, either helping to rescue the wounded or leaning against a few soldiers to discuss the route for tomorrow. He never once looked back at the civilians or paid attention to Sarah. She didn't mind this, just silently observing the life he was leading now. I also learned from others that Eric now has a very high status in the country and really commands a large army. He was specifically responsible for clearing out those St. Warren soldiers who were about to invade the capital, and using their prisoners to exchange for his own prisoners. He would also help kill any newborns he passed by. He no longer hid his identity as a werewolf, nor did he suffer any unfair treatment because of it. Everyone was convinced of his decision. Sira had been thinking about how she could reduce his pain, and at first she thought of approaching him, as she had done with Rose Hill, to try to persuade everyone to talk. Now seeing his current behavior, she wanted to change her mind. Eric was originally just, and her death was a blow to him, but he did not turn bad. He hunted vampires and provoked a racial war, all to protect humans and his tribe. If the blackening value can only be reduced by 1, she should not give him hope anymore. Time may smooth out the damage she caused to him. He has not branded her. He has always been free. As long as the war subsides, everyone will return. A normal day. Before Eric noticed and looked over, Sierra lowered her eyes, turned around and shrank back to the woman next to her. Yes. On that invisible negotiation table, Lucid had promised her that she would not use humans as food in the sea. As long as the vampires did not do evil, Eric would never interfere in the affairs between races. There is only one person who needs stability at that negotiating table from beginning to end. It is Rose Hill, who never has sunshine in her heart. The king of the night who fought in the royal family in the 14th century and almost died of the Black Death. Sira stared at the flickering firelight in front of her. Thinking about it, she would have to crawl to this capital. His intention of throwing her out that day was simply to accept the fact that she was playing with the relationship between the three of them, and to send her out to make her own choice. I never thought that he would be so generous one day. It must be very sad for such a proud person. Eric didn't understand why the girl kept staring at him. He never gave her a look, but those eyes seemed to have roots on his back, following him wherever he went, and it was hard to ignore. She was the mermaid's mate, and she wouldn't like werewolves. But this look was so strange that Eric couldn't help it and turned back to look for her. But among the crowd of civilians, the soft gaze had already withdrawn before him, and even that petite body could not be found. Unconsciously, Eric stood up with the water glass and walked over, and then he spotted the girl who was eating sweet potatoes with her head buried in her head. She is thin, has dull blonde hair, a dirty face, and looks ordinary. She lowered her eyes, probably feeling him standing behind her, her eyelashes trembling, but she didn't turn around to look at him. He looked so honest and well behaved, as if the sight that had just been focused on him had never existed at all. That's weird, why should he care? Eric thought. He couldn't figure out the reason, and found that the civilians he came to express their condolences were thanking him. All kinds of noisy words of thanks were stuffed into his ears, but he didn't hear the girl's thank you. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Shire. Author, Mei Gui Cheng. Chapter 250. She obviously said it not long ago, but she won't say it again now. Eric looked at her deeply, and after a while he felt that he was overthinking it. She was an ordinary girl with nothing worth exploring. In order not to miss the dead Sira, he was willing to be surrounded by war every day. Such days lasted for too long and made him feel tired. Eric briefly said a few words to them, then turned and left. Sira finished eating the sweet potatoes and drank all the glass of hot water, and then huddled around the fire with everyone, absorbing the only warmth to spend this cold night. The night was uneventful, and the strong smell of blood did not attract the vampire's attention. Everyone was ordered to get up in the early morning. They need to walk to the village behind the army. If nothing else happens, we may have to go to noon. It was the woman from last night who once again gave her 2 cold sweet potatoes. You can eat this when you are hungry. You will definitely not stop in the middle of. It seems that they have followed us all the way and are very experienced. Sira thanked you and asked politely, can I know your name and address? I will repay you when I get to the capital when I have the chance. The other party didn't have paper and pen, so he just listened to this kind of thing and told her casually, not caring that he would receive anything in return from her in the future. Sierra silently remembered it in her mind and glanced at Eric, who was sitting on the horse in the front from a distance. The large group set off and had to cross a mountain to reach the village on the opposite side. Vampires usually appear in places where these leaves block light. Today was unexpectedly smooth. Eric's nose smelled a few restless ones, but no one dared to come up to confront him. Sierra was still wearing a pair of heeled leather shoes, and her heels were hurting. She felt like she was going to get blisters, and she started to walk obviously crookedly. "Do you need help?" A horse came to her with iron hoofs, and immediately there was a strange young soldier. He bent down and stretched out his hand to her. "I can bring one more person." Eric glanced back and ignored the civilians his soldiers occasionally chatted with. Their lives might be lost tomorrow. He just wanted them to live more casually. Sierra didn't refuse. She didn't want to show off her strength and walk to the village, where her feet would be rotten. The soldier picked her up and put her on the horse. "Oh my God, you are so thin. Did they not give you food when they tortured you?" The soldier was surprised. Sierra silently took out her sweet potatoes and planned to sit down and eat them. "Well, you won't give me food. What's your name?" Sierra looked at Eric subconsciously and pursed her lips. "I forgot." "Can you forget your own name? Where is your home?" "In the capital." Sierra remembered and asked, "Is there a village over this mountain that I can take a ride to the capital?" The soldier said, "Yes, but the world is difficult now and the journey is dangerous and the fare is very high. You have to prepare enough money." Sierra was silent for a long time. "I have no money." In the rush to get out of the island, how could she remember the gold coins used to step on her feet? He pointed to the tall man at the front. "Then you can ask our general to borrow some money. He scraped a lot of money from those prisoners yesterday." Sierra stopped talking and looked hesitant. The soldiers kept talking to her along the way. They found that she was very talkative and gradually stopped talking. Near noon, a large group of troops arrived at the village. The place had not been baptized by war and seemed quite peaceful. However, the residents were a little scared when they first discovered them. The prisoners all had their hands tied with ropes, were strung together like grasshoppers, and were left in an open field to be guarded. Civilians scattered to receive help or hurried off on the road with their few possessions. Sierra was penniless, and not even the old woman could help her. After she dismounted, she declined the invitation to choose a room with the soldier to have some fun. The soldier was quite angry and gained nothing from taking her along, but it was difficult to say anything due to military discipline. Sierra just apologized and turned around and walked towards Eric. "Hello, General Eric, I..." Before he could finish a complete sentence, he took out a small money bag from his pocket and threw it to her without looking at her. Sierra quickly caught it and heard him say calmly, "The money in it is enough for you to go to the capital." She looked up at him on the horse and pursed her lower lip. It must have been a hard journey. Eric played with the reins in his hand. "Yeah." Sierra held the money bag tightly, and then said softly, "I'm sorry for causing you trouble." Eric paused his hand and slowly turned his head. She had already turned around and left holding the money bag. That he suddenly stopped her and asked, "That mermaid is your spouse?" Sierra turned around and looked at the handsome and resolute face. Their eyes met. She smiled and denied, "Just friends, goodbye." When the people walked away, Eric stared at the getting smaller and smaller figure, slowly covering his chest. It's obviously an ordinary little face, but it's still dirty. Why is his heart throbbing because of that smile? She and Sierra, who was dazzling in her memory, were obviously not the same person. Sierra didn't know what he was thinking. She found a boss in the village who was willing to start a driving business, spent 2 gold coins with him, and got on the bus to the capital. The remaining gold coin is used to spend money on food on the way. After the car drove out of the other end of the village, Eric's team also repaired and was about to continue setting off. For some reason, he suddenly became anxious. I feel anxious for no reason because of that smile and those eyes. Something was wrong. If it wasn't her spouse, how could the mermaid smell linger on her body for so long, unless she was wearing something? The dismounted horse seemed to sense the owner's anxiety and paced back and forth uneasily. "It's time for us to go, General," someone reminded him. Eric suddenly asked the soldier behind him, "Did you tell you her name when you took her there during the day?" The soldier looked puzzled, then shook his head honestly, "No, if there was, you would definitely be able to hear it." "What did she say?" Eric narrowed his eyes, remembering that she said she had forgotten. He seemed to understand a very likely answer. He suddenly grabbed the reins and turned the horse's head, rushing into the village like an out-of-control madman. "Is she back? As a new player, do you want to conquer others? Isn't it him?" This possibility made Eric extremely uncomfortable. He knew where she was going. She was going to the capital. Sierra was drowsy in the car. Not long after leaving the village, there was a loud sound of trees collapsing from behind the car. Something broke several cedar trees and was charging in their direction. Sierra was startled by the movement, and the people sitting opposite her in the carpool screamed, as if they had seen something extremely terrifying. Just as she was about to look through the car window, a black shadow rushed across the roof of the car, and a huge figure blocked the front of the car. The driver barely stopped the car with a hard brake. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 251. A giant gray wolf with spots blocked the road ahead. The driver, who reacted first, screamed, opened the door and fled, followed closely by the passengers. Everyone ran away except for Sierra, who was the last one to get out of the car. The moment she saw the wolf, she recognized that it was Eric by its hair, and she relaxed for a moment from her tense nerves. The giant wolf stepped closer to her step by step with its thick paws, and its fist-sized brown pupils reflected her appearance. His nose sniffed her body, his eyes not missing any subtle expression on her face. Sierra also remained motionless, looking as if she was frightened. The two looked at each other for a moment, then the wolf exhaled a breath, took 2 steps back and returned to his human form. Eric was naked, and his honey-colored skin was completely exposed to the cold winter. He couldn't feel the cold at all, and his eyes were fixed on Sierra's face. She raised the corners of her lips and said calmly, "What's the matter, General Eric?" The same soft and warm eyes, without a trace of fear, so familiar. Eric's eyes lowered and slid all the way to one of her wrists, then he stepped forward, grasped the thin wrist bone, and pulled up her sleeve. A string of beautiful fish scale bracelets were exposed in front of his eyes. He raised his head suddenly and understood something. He looked at her with a sense of abandonment and despair. "This is Luxid's bracelet. This makes sense, why she is not a mermaid mate and still has the smell of a mermaid, why the mermaid who follows Rockside specially escorts a human, and why she even says she has forgotten her name." Sierra's breath was choked by his eyes, and she didn't know what to say. Her reaction also confirmed this. Eric said sadly, "You came back, but you didn't come to find me. Is it because you found a new target? So you abandoned me again?" The man, as strong as a mountain, was bent over, breathing heavily. His heart was pinched so hard by her that it hurt like hell. "I didn't." Sierra also panicked, reaching out to touch his face, standing on tiptoes to wrap her arms around his neck and hugging him. "I didn't abandon you, Eric, and I didn't have a new target to attack. Play games." Her body was so thin that it was difficult to hold him on her feet. Eric, who was 1 year older, was too tall. He quickly understood the size difference and wrapped his arms around her waist, picking her up and holding her in his arms with extreme caution. The cold-faced and iron-blooded general showed a grieved expression for the first time in many days, Then why do you pretend you don't know me? Sierra's feet were dangling in the air, her chin resting on his shoulder, and she comforted him softly, because you have more important things to do, and your life is very good now. I don't want to disturb you, after all. She lowered her eyes and said apologetically, I told you the truth. This is a deception. How can you continue to date a liar? Eric buried his head in her hair and whispered, I know that was not your intention. If you don't attack me, I will kill you because of Anaxi. But I'm very glad he suppressed his emotions. I'm glad you came to attack me, because I don't want to kill you at all. You did nothing wrong. Just thinking about such a scene happening made him miserable, and he understood the decision that Sierra had made. I never blamed you and I can't forget you, Eric said. They made too many firsts, and it was those beautiful memories that supported him until now. He insists on being a version of himself that she will like. He has insisted on it for so long, how could he forget it? She taught him love and took away his heart, although that heart was later abandoned by her without hesitation. She would rather die and go home than stay here. But this is excusable, isn't it? He always convinced himself so. Eric's eyes turned red and his deep voice trembled, I miss you every day. Love has supported me until now. I have not turned into something you hate. Sierra could hear how wronged and sad he had been in the year after her death. She tightened her arms and hugged him hard, her voice filled with tears, You have always done a good job, Eric, you have not turned into something I hate, and you will never be hated by me. It's my problem. Eric gently stroked her back and comforted her, You must have had a hard time pretending to me. No, 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 Sierra quickly denied, with tears in her eyes, I don't feel it's hard, I just think you are so perfect, the best boyfriend who can't fault you. That's good. Eric breathed a sigh of relief, and all the tense muscles in his body relaxed due to this compliment. The two hugged each other for a long time before Sierra's flying feet were placed on the ground. The tears in the corners of her eyes were wiped away by his rough fingertips. Why go to the capital alone? Sierra no longer hid it from him, I want everyone to live in harmony. The world has become a bad place because of me, and I am going to solve the problem. He touched her face and said sympathetically, You can't go to the capital alone, I will take you there. But you still have something to do. Sierra was referring to the army with prisoners. She had forgotten that Eric could easily abandon his armor and want nothing when he met her. But you are a lost treasure, Sierra. He leaned over and carefully kissed her forehead, How can I leave you again? He had always regretted it the day he found out about her accident. Why didn't he move faster? The day he found her, she was no longer alive. She didn't even have time to say a word to him, and she died so tragically. He couldn't let something like this happen a second time. Sierra ultimately did not reject Eric and could no longer reject him. He drove her back to the village in his car. The soldiers discovered that he had transformed and quickly found him a new military uniform to put on. When Sierra got out of the car and returned the car to the owner, the man was pale and had not yet recovered from the shock. It was not until he understood that the leader of the army was a werewolf that he digested the news with a shocked expression. Eric, I'm going to arrange some things later and hand them over to the people below. I'll stay in the village tonight. I'll take you with me tomorrow, okay? Sierra nodded, It's just one night, there's no rush. She was picked up by him and found a room to stay in. Soldiers quickly boiled hot water and provided new winter cotton clothes for Sierra to use. She soaked in the barrel for the first hot bath in so many days, her wet hair hanging behind her back. Eric was just a door away from her, holding a small box of ointment in his hand. Remembering that he had made her walk behind the team all morning and her heels were worn out, he wanted to punch himself in frustration. Why didn't he recognize her earlier? As long as he paid more attention to her, he could find that she was different, but he was disturbed by the fishy smell.